The morning sun beat down on the military base in Afghanistan as Dr. Sarah Chen stepped out of the medical transport vehicle. Her worn combat boots hit the dusty ground with practiced silence. At 28 years old, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen too much for her age. The other medics around her chatted nervously about their new assignment, but Sarah remained silent, her dark eyes scanning the compound that would be her home for the next 6 months. The base buzzed with activity as soldiers prepared for another day of operations. Sarah had been specially requested for this assignment by Colonel Martinez, though she didn't know why. Her medical record was impressive, but so were many others. What she didn't know was that her file contained classified information that made her uniquely qualified for this particular mission. As she walked toward the medical facility, Sarah noticed a group of soldiers training nearby. Their movements were different from regular infantry, more precise, more deadly. These were Navy SEALs, the elite special operations team she would be supporting. Team Alpha consisted of 6 highly trained operators, each with years of combat experience under their belts. The team leader, Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, was a 32-year-old from Texas who had been leading special operations for over 8 years. His second-in-command, Chief Petty Officer Marcus Williams, was known for his incredible marksmanship skills. The team also included Petty Officer First Class David Tank Rodriguez, whose nickname came from his ability to carry heavy equipment without complaint. Petty Officer Second Class Ryan O'Connor was their explosives expert, while Petty Officer Third Class Alex Thompson handled communications. The youngest member, Petty Officer Third Class Miguel Santos, was their intelligence specialist. Sarah watched them train for a moment, noting their seamless coordination. She had worked with special forces before, but SEALs were different. They operated like a single organism, each member anticipating the other's movements without verbal communication. "Dr. Chen?" A voice interrupted her observation. She turned to see a young corpsman approaching. "I'm Corpsman Jenkins. I'll be showing you around the medical facility." Sarah nodded and followed him toward a series of connected buildings that served as the base's primary medical center. The facility was well equipped for a forward operating base, with surgical suites, recovery rooms, and a well-stocked pharmacy. What caught her attention, however, was the separate wing marked Special Operations Medical. "That's where you'll be working primarily," Jenkins explained, noticing her interest. "The SEAL teams have their own medical protocols, different injuries, different treatments, different requirements." Sarah understood what he meant without him having to spell it out. Special operations soldiers faced unique dangers and often sustained injuries that required specialized care. They also operated under strict confidentiality requirements that meant their medical treatment needed to be handled separately from regular forces. Inside the Special Operations Medical Wing, Sarah met Dr. Robert Hayes, the chief medical officer who would be her supervisor. Dr. Hayes was a veteran military physician who had spent 15 years treating Special Forces soldiers. His weathered face told the story of countless difficult surgeries and impossible decisions made under pressure. "Dr. Chen, welcome to the real war," Dr. Hayes said, shaking her hand firmly. "Your record is impressive. Harvard Medical School, Johns Hopkins residency, board certification in emergency medicine and trauma surgery. But tell me, what makes you think you're ready for this?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I've been ready for this my whole life, sir." Dr. Hayes studied her for a long moment, noting something in her eyes that went beyond medical training. There was a depth there, an understanding of violence and trauma that couldn't be taught in medical school. He had seen that look before, but never in someone so young. "Your psychological evaluation mentions some gaps in your personal history," Dr. Hayes said carefully. "The military requires complete transparency from medical personnel. especially those working with special operations. Sarah's jaw tightened slightly. My records contain everything relevant to my ability to perform my duties, sir. Dr. Hayes nodded slowly. He had been briefed on Dr. Chen's unique background, though the details were classified at a level that even he couldn't access completely. What he knew was that she had been personally recommended by the Pentagon's Special Operations Medical Division, and that her psychological profile indicated she was uniquely suited for high-stress combat medicine. Later that afternoon, Sarah was introduced to SEAL Team Alpha during their medical briefing. The 6 operators sat in a semicircle in the briefing room, their attention focused and professional. Lieutenant Commander Morrison led the introductions, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. "Gentlemen, this is Dr. Chen. She'll be our primary medical officer for the duration of our deployment. Dr. Chen, these are my operators." Sarah studied each face as they were introduced. These men had the look of warriors, alert, confident, and dangerous, but she also noticed something else in their eyes. They were evaluating her, trying to determine if she could be trusted with their lives in the most critical moments. Chief Williams spoke first. "Doc, no offense, but you look pretty young. How much combat experience do you have?" It was a fair question, and Sarah had expected it. "I've completed advanced combat medical training and have experience in high-stress emergency situations. I understand the unique requirements of special operations medicine." Tank Rodriguez leaned forward. "That's not what he asked. Have you been shot at? Have you operated on someone while bullets were flying overhead?" Sarah met his gaze without flinching. "I've worked under pressure before." The answer was technically true, but it didn't satisfy the SEALs. They exchanged glances that conveyed volumes of unspoken communication. These men trusted each other with their lives, and now they were being asked to trust someone they didn't know. Ryan O'Connor, the explosives expert, tried a different approach. "Doc, we need to know you won't freeze up when things get bad. We've seen medical personnel panic when the shooting starts. Can't afford that." Sarah understood their concern, but she couldn't give them the answer they wanted without revealing information she wasn't ready to share. "I won't freeze up," she said simply. Alex Thompson, the communications specialist, frowned. "How can you be so sure? Combat medicine isn't like civilian emergency medicine. It's chaos." Sarah's voice remained steady, but something flickered in her eyes. "I know what chaos looks like." Miguel Santos, the youngest member of the team, picked up on the subtle change in her demeanor. As an intelligence specialist, he was trained to read people, and something about Dr. Chen didn't add up. Her confidence wasn't the bravado of someone trying to prove themselves. It was the quiet assurance of someone who had already been tested. Lieutenant Commander Morrison concluded the briefing without resolving the team's concerns. "Dr. Chen will be conducting training exercises over the next few days. I want you to observe our procedures and familiarize yourself with our operations." As the meeting ended, the SEAL team members filed out, their conversations subdued. Sarah could tell they weren't convinced she was the right fit for their team, but she also knew that words wouldn't change their minds, only actions would prove her worth. That evening, Sarah sat alone in her quarters, looking at a worn photograph she kept hidden in her personal effects. The image showed a much younger version of herself, maybe 12 years old, standing with a group of other children in what appeared to be a refugee camp. Her eyes in the photograph held the same depth that Dr. Hayes had noticed earlier, but in a child's face, it looked wrong, like innocence that had been stolen too early. She carefully placed the photograph back in its hiding place and prepared for her first night on the base. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and she knew the SEAL team would be watching her every move, waiting for any sign of weakness or hesitation. What none of them knew was that Dr. Sarah Chen carried secrets that would change everything they thought they knew about war, survival, and the true meaning of courage. Her medical skills were indeed exceptional, but they had been forged in circumstances that no American soldier could imagine. As she lay in her narrow military cot, Sarah closed her eyes and tried to push away the memories that always threatened to surface in quiet moments. She had worked too hard and come too far to let the past interfere with her mission now. But deep down, she knew that eventually, the truth would come out. The SEALs would learn that their quiet, mysterious medic had secrets that ran deeper than any classified military operation. And when that moment came, everything would change. 3 weeks into the deployment, Sarah had proven herself capable, but remained an outsider to the tight-knit SEAL team. She performed her duties flawlessly during training exercises, demonstrating exceptional medical skills and maintaining calm under simulated pressure. However, the team members still kept their distance, unsure about their enigmatic medic who answered questions with precision, but revealed nothing personal about herself. The breakthrough came during what should have been a routine reconnaissance mission. SEAL Team Alpha was tasked with gathering intelligence on a suspected weapons cache in a village 40 kilometers from the base. Sarah accompanied them as the mission medic, her first real operation with the team. The mission began smoothly. The team inserted under cover of darkness, moving through the desert terrain with the silent precision that had made them legendary. Sarah stayed close to Lieutenant Commander Morrison, carrying her medical pack and monitoring the team's condition as they navigated the rocky landscape. The village appeared deserted when they arrived, which immediately raised red flags for the experienced operators. Chief Williams hand-signaled the team to spread out and proceed with extreme caution. Something felt wrong about the situation, but they had a job to complete. As Tank Rodriguez moved to investigate the suspected weapons cache in a damaged building, the world exploded around them. The structure had been rigged with improvised explosive devices, and the blast threw Rodriguez backward, his body armor saving his life, but leaving him seriously injured. "IED! IED!" Ryan O'Connor shouted as automatic weapons fire erupted from concealed positions around the village. The team had walked into a carefully planned ambush. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. She sprinted toward Rodriguez's position as bullets whined through the air around her, showing no hesitation or fear. The SEALs were impressed by her courage, but they were too busy fighting for their lives to dwell on it. Rodriguez was conscious, but badly hurt. Shrapnel had penetrated his body armor in several places, and blood was soaking through his uniform. Sarah quickly assessed his injuries while bullets cracked overhead, and the rest of the team returned fire from covered positions. "Tank, stay with me," Sarah said calmly, her hands already working to stop the bleeding. "You're going to be fine." But as she worked, Sarah could see that Rodriguez's injuries were more serious than she had initially thought. He had internal bleeding that required immediate surgical intervention, and they were pinned down by enemy fire with no way to evacuate him quickly. Lieutenant Commander Morrison army-crawled over to their position during a brief lull in the shooting. "Doc, how bad is it?" Sarah looked up from her patient, her face grim. "He needs surgery now, or he's not going to make it. I can stabilize him temporarily, but we need to get him out of here." Morrison keyed his radio to call for extraction, but the response wasn't what he wanted to hear. The landing zone was too hot for a helicopter to land safely, and it would be at least 20 minutes before air support could suppress the enemy fire enough for an evacuation. 20 minutes is too long," Sarah said quietly, checking Rodriguez's vital signs. "He doesn't have 20 minutes. The situation was desperate. Rodriguez's blood pressure was dropping, and despite Sarah's efforts, the internal bleeding was getting worse. The rest of the team continued to fight off the attackers, but they were outnumbered and running low on ammunition. That's when Sarah made a decision that changed everything. "I need to operate on him here," she announced, opening her medical pack fully for the first time. Morrison stared at her in disbelief. "Doc, that's impossible. We're in the middle of a firefight. You can't perform surgery in a combat zone." Sarah was already pulling out surgical instruments that the SEALs hadn't known she carried. Her medical pack was far more extensive than standard combat medic equipment, containing tools and supplies that seemed almost out of place in a battlefield environment. "Cover me," Sarah said simply, and something in her voice made Morrison realize she wasn't asking for permission. What happened next would be burned into the memories of every SEAL team member who witnessed it, as bullets flew overhead and explosions shook the ground around them. Dr. Sarah Chen began performing emergency surgery on Tank Rodriguez in the middle of an active combat zone. Her hands moved with impossible steadiness and precision. She located the source of the internal bleeding and began repairing damaged blood vessels while Chief Williams and the other team members maintained defensive fire around their position. It was like watching a master surgeon work in an operating room, except the operating room was a war zone. Miguel Santos, who was closest to Sarah during the surgery, noticed something that made his blood run cold. As she worked, Sarah was speaking quietly in a language he didn't recognize at first. Then he realized she was speaking Khmer, the language of Cambodia. But more disturbing than that was what she was saying. "It's okay, little brother. The bad men can't hurt you anymore. Sister will fix you," she whispered in Khmer as she worked on Rodriguez. Her voice carried the tone of someone comforting a frightened child, but her eyes held a distant look that suggested she was somewhere else entirely. Santos had enough intelligence training to recognize trauma responses when he saw them. Dr. Chen was operating on Rodriguez, but in her mind, she was somewhere else, treating someone else, someone much younger. The surgery took 12 minutes, performed under conditions that would have been considered impossible by any military medical standard. Sarah successfully repaired the damaged blood vessels and stopped the internal bleeding, working with a skill and efficiency that seemed almost supernatural. As she finished the procedure, air support finally arrived and began suppressing the enemy positions. Within minutes, a helicopter was able to land for extraction, and Rodriguez was loaded aboard, stable and alive thanks to Sarah's incredible intervention. During the flight back to base, the team was unusually quiet. They had just witnessed something that defied explanation, a field surgery performed under impossible conditions by a medic who had demonstrated skills far beyond anything they had encountered before. Chief Williams finally broke the silence. "Doc, where did you learn to do that?" Sarah, exhausted from the surgery and the adrenaline crash that followed, looked at him with haunted eyes. "Sometimes you learn to do impossible things because the alternative is watching people die." Back at the base, Rodriguez was rushed to the main surgical facility where Dr. Hayes examined Sarah's field surgery. His expression grew more amazed with each discovery. The surgical technique was flawless, the sutures perfect, and the repair work was better than what most surgeons could achieve in ideal conditions. "Dr. Chen," Dr. Hayes said privately after completing his examination, "this is extraordinary work. But I have to ask, how did you learn techniques that aren't taught in any medical school? Some of these approaches, they're not standard procedures." Sarah's face remained expressionless. "I've had unconventional training opportunities." Dr. Hayes studied her carefully. "Your file mentions that you spent time overseas as a child before coming to the United States. Were you in a war zone?" For a moment, Sarah's carefully constructed composure cracked, and Dr. Hayes saw a flash of the traumatized child she had once been. But just as quickly, she regained control. "I don't discuss my childhood, sir." That evening, the members of SEAL Team Alpha gathered in their common area to discuss what they had witnessed. Lieutenant Commander Morrison had already filed his after-action report, praising Dr. Chen's life-saving actions, but the team needed to process what they had experienced. "That wasn't normal combat medicine," Ryan O'Connor said, shaking his head. "I've seen field surgeries before, but nothing like that. She was operating like she had X-ray vision or something." Alex Thompson nodded in agreement. "And did anyone else notice how calm she was? It wasn't just professional calm, it was like she had done that exact procedure under those exact conditions before. Miguel Santos had been quiet during most of the discussion, but finally he spoke up. There's something else. During the surgery, she was speaking Cambodian. She was talking to someone who wasn't there, calling them little brother. The room fell silent as the implications of Santos's observation sank in. Cambodia had experienced one of the most brutal conflicts in modern history during the 1970s and 1980s. If Dr. Chen had been there as a child, she would have witnessed horrors that most adults couldn't imagine. Morrison frowned. How old do you think she is? 28 according to her file, Williams replied. But if she was in Cambodia during the worst of the fighting, she would have been just a kid, Thompson finished quietly. The pieces were starting to come together, but the picture they formed was almost too terrible to contemplate. Their quiet, professional medic might be a survivor of one of the most brutal genocides in human history. Her incredible medical skills might have been learned not in medical school, but as a child trying to save other children in unimaginable circumstances. Rodriguez, heavily sedated but stable, had been asking for Dr. Chen since he regained consciousness. When Sarah finally visited him in the recovery ward, he grabbed her hand with surprising strength. Doc, I don't know what you did out there, but you saved my life. Thank you. Sarah squeezed his hand gently. You would have done the same for me. As she left the recovery ward, Sarah didn't notice Miguel Santos following at a discreet distance. His intelligence training had kicked in, and he felt compelled to learn more about the woman who had saved his teammate's life. What he discovered when he carefully accessed her personnel file would shake him to his core. Dr. Sarah Chen had been born in Cambodia in 1997, but her birth certificate had been issued by the United States government when she was 12 years old. Before that, there was no official record of her existence. She had been brought to America as a refugee, sponsored by a medical charity that specialized in helping war orphans. The file contained one additional piece of information that made Santos's blood run cold. Before coming to America, Sarah had been documented as a child medic who had been treating wounded refugees in Cambodia since she was approximately 8 years old. She had learned medicine not from textbooks, but from desperate necessity in a war zone where children were forced to grow up far too quickly. Santos realized that their mysterious medic carried secrets that were darker and more profound than any of them had imagined. And he also realized that when the rest of the team learned the truth, it would change everything they thought they knew about war, survival, and the true cost of conflict. Miguel Santos struggled with what he had learned about Dr. Chen for 3 days before finally approaching Lieutenant Commander Morrison. The intelligence specialist knew that revealing classified information from personnel files was a serious breach of protocol. But he also knew his team deserved to understand the woman who had saved Rodriguez's life. Morrison listened in stunned silence as Santos shared his discoveries about Sarah's background. The team leader had seen many things during his military career, but the idea of an 8-year-old child learning surgery in a war zone was almost too horrific to process. Are you certain about this information? Morrison asked quietly. Santos nodded grimly. The documentation is all there, sir. She was brought to the United States as part of a special refugee program for war orphans who had been forced into medical roles during the Cambodian conflicts. The charity that sponsored her noted that she had already developed surgical skills that surpassed many adult medics. Morrison stared out the window of his quarters, trying to imagine the horrors that their quiet medic had endured as a child. Does she know that you accessed her file? No, sir. But I think we need to consider how to handle this. The team has been asking questions since the surgery. They know something doesn't add up about her background. Morrison made a decision that would change everything for SEAL Team Alpha. Call a team meeting. It's time we understood who we're really working with. That evening, the 6 members of SEAL Team Alpha gathered in their secure briefing room. Morrison had sent word to Dr. Chen that her presence was requested for a routine team evaluation. When she arrived, she found the SEALs arranged in their usual semicircle, but the atmosphere was different from their previous meetings. Sarah immediately sensed the change in their demeanor. These men had the look of soldiers who had discovered something important, and she could guess what it might be. She had been waiting for this moment since her arrival at the base. Lieutenant Commander Morrison stood and faced her directly. "Dr. Chen, we need to have an honest conversation about your background and qualifications." Sarah's expression remained neutral, but her hands clasped slightly behind her back, a subtle sign of tension that Miguel Santos noticed immediately. "I'm not sure what you mean, sir." Chief Williams leaned forward. "Doc, we know about Cambodia. We know you were there during the war, and we know you learned medicine as a child." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Sarah's carefully constructed professional facade finally cracked, and for a moment, the team saw the traumatized child she had once been. But just as quickly, she regained her composure. "My personal history doesn't affect my ability to perform my duties," she said quietly. Tank Rodriguez, still recovering from his injuries but insisting on attending the meeting, spoke from his wheelchair. "Doc, you saved my life with skills that nobody learns in medical school. We're not questioning your abilities. We're trying to understand who you really are." Sarah looked at each face in the semicircle, seeing not suspicion or judgment, but genuine concern and curiosity. These men had become more than just an assignment to her, and she realized that they deserved the truth, no matter how painful it might be to share. "What do you want to know?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Morrison's tone softened. "Tell us about Cambodia. Tell us how a little girl learned to perform surgery in a war zone." Sarah was quiet for so long that the team began to wonder if she would answer at all. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of memories that had haunted her for 20 years. "I was born in a village outside Phnom Penh in 1997. The fighting had been going on for years, and my village was caught between different military factions. My parents were killed when I was 6 years old during a raid on our village." She paused, struggling to find words for experiences that defied description. "After my parents died, I was taken in by Dr. Elena Vasquez, a Spanish medical volunteer who was running a makeshift hospital in the jungle. Dr. Vasquez had been treating wounded civilians and refugees for 3 years, working with almost no supplies and no help." Ryan O'Connor frowned. "How did you end up learning medicine? You were just a kid." Sarah's eyes took on a distant look, as if she was seeing into the past. "Dr. Vasquez was the only adult left in our group after the other medical volunteers were killed or fled. There were over 100 wounded people in our camp, including dozens of children. She couldn't treat them all by herself." The room was completely silent as the team began to understand the impossible situation Sarah had faced as a child. "At first, I just helped with simple things, cleaning wounds, holding bandages, comforting the patients, but as more wounded people arrived and the situation got worse, Dr. Vasquez had to teach me more advanced procedures. She said it was either teach a 6-year-old girl to do surgery or watch people die." Alex Thompson shook his head in disbelief. "That's incredible. How long were you in that situation?" 6 years, Sarah replied simply. "From age 6 to 12. We moved through the jungle constantly, always running from one faction or another. I learned medicine by necessity, treating gunshot wounds, performing amputations, delivering babies, removing shrapnel, whatever needed to be done to keep people alive." Miguel Santos, who had discovered her records, asked the question that was haunting all of them. "What happened to Dr. Vasquez?" Sarah's composure finally broke completely, and tears began streaming down her face. "She was killed during our last week in Cambodia. A group of soldiers found our camp and started shooting everyone. Dr. Vasquez threw herself over a group of children to protect them. She took 3 bullets to the chest. The team watched in stunned silence as their strong, professional medic wept for the woman who had been both her mentor and her surrogate mother. I tried to save her, Sarah continued through her tears. I used everything she had taught me. But her injuries were too severe. She died in my arms, asking me to promise that I would continue helping people. She made me promise that I would use what she had taught me to save lives, not take them. Lieutenant Commander Morrison felt his own eyes filling with tears as he began to understand the full scope of what Sarah had endured. How did you get to America? Sarah wiped her eyes and tried to regain her composure. After Dr. Vasquez died, I led the remaining survivors, mostly children and wounded adults, through the jungle for 2 weeks until we reached the Thai border. A refugee organization documented what I had been doing and arranged for me to be brought to the United States through a special program for child medical volunteers. Chief Williams asked the question that was troubling all of them. Doc, how did you survive that psychologically? How did you not break down completely? Sarah looked at him with eyes that held depths of pain and strength that none of them had ever seen. Dr. Vasquez used to tell me that trauma either destroys you or makes you stronger. She said that if I could survive what I was living through, I could survive anything. But she also taught me that the only way to heal from trauma is to use it to help others heal. Tank Rodriguez wheeled his chair closer to Sarah. Is that why you became a doctor? To honor her memory? Sarah nodded. Every surgery I perform, every life I save, is for Dr. Vasquez and for all the people we couldn't save in Cambodia. When I operated on you in that village, I wasn't just treating you. I was treating every wounded child I couldn't help 20 years ago. The room fell silent again as the team processed the incredible story they had just heard. These men were warriors who had seen combat and understood violence. But Sarah's childhood experience was beyond anything they could imagine. Ryan O'Connor was the first to speak. Doc, I need to say something. When we first met you, we thought you were too young and inexperienced for our team. We were wrong. You're probably the most experienced combat medic any of us will ever work with. The other team members nodded in agreement. Alex Thompson added, You've been treating battle wounds since you were 6 years old. That's more combat medical experience than all of us combined. Sarah looked around the circle of faces, seeing acceptance and respect where she had expected judgment or pity. I've spent my whole life trying to prove that I'm more than just a victim of war. Sometimes I think people will see me as damaged or unreliable if they know the truth about my past. Lieutenant Commander Morrison stood and walked over to Sarah, placing his hand on her shoulder. Dr. Chen, you're not damaged. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met. And you're not just our medic anymore, you're part of our family. The other team members stood as well, forming a circle around Sarah in a gesture of acceptance and protection. For the first time since arriving at the base, Sarah felt like she truly belonged somewhere. Chief Williams spoke for the entire team. Doc, we've all seen some terrible things in our careers, but nothing like what you survived as a child. The fact that you came through that experience and decided to dedicate your life to saving others, that's the kind of courage we can only hope to have. Miguel Santos, who had initially discovered her secret, apologized for accessing her files without permission. I'm sorry I invaded your privacy, but I'm glad the truth is finally out. You don't have to carry those secrets alone anymore. Sarah smiled through her tears, feeling a weight lifting from her shoulders that she had carried for 20 years. Thank you for accepting me. Dr. Vasquez always said that healing happens when people stop hiding their wounds and allow others to help them heal. From that night forward, the dynamic of SEAL Team Alpha changed completely. Sarah was no longer an outsider trying to prove herself worthy of their trust. She was family, and they would protect her just as fiercely as she had protected them with her medical skills. Tank Rodriguez recovered fully from his surgery, and he made sure everyone on the base knew that Dr. Chen had saved his life under impossible circumstances. Word of Sarah's incredible story spread throughout the special operations community, though the details remained classified. 3 months later, as their deployment neared its end, Lieutenant Commander Morrison submitted a formal recommendation that Dr. Sarah Chen be permanently assigned to Special Operations medical duty. In his report, he wrote, "Dr. Chen represents the finest qualities of military medical personnel: skill, courage, and dedication to saving lives. Her unique background and exceptional abilities make her an invaluable asset to any special operations team." But more importantly than any official recognition, Sarah had found something she had been searching for her entire life: a family of warriors who understood that the deepest wounds are often invisible and that true strength comes from using your pain to help others heal. The little girl who had learned surgery in the jungles of Cambodia had grown into a woman who embodied the highest ideals of military medicine. Dr. Elena Vasquez would have been proud.